So, an open content, open source technology platform for multilingual sign, text, storybooks, and games. We are sadly not joined by my colleague, Dr. Kurz. Chris had a family issue arise. He was unable to join us. He's very disappointed not to be here with me today talking to you, but he runs a mathematics and science language and learning lab at the National Technical Institute for the Deaf, which is part of the Rochester Institute of Technology. He's essentially the content lead on this, and I'm the director of Open at RIT, which is our second ever in the US university-based OSPO, and I've been teaching students to be contributors all the way up through an academic minor for the past 12 years. And we're working together on this with another group of fine folks. So this is kind of like one of the ultimate DEI issues. In the late 1700s, the world decided that deaf children should only be taught to attempt to speak and not to use sign language in their classrooms. That didn't change until 1959, when a US-based linguistics professor proved that signed languages were indeed real languages rather than these weird gestural things that made no sense. And people started to use sign language in classrooms, though there's been back and forth about that since 1960. And because the US was the first country to implement this, once other places decided to use sign language in the classrooms, they used American Sign Language. There are actually hundreds of sign languages, as there are thousands of spoken languages around the world. And there's a lot of challenges to literacy to deaf children. First is that written languages are meant to represent spoken language. There's a huge neurological and cognitive challenge in you learning a text language if you don't hear the language that's being spoken. So that's challenge one. Challenge two, inaccessibility to deaf native language modules. So 90% of deaf children do not have deaf parents. Their parents in most countries of the world, and even here, often are told not to sign to them. So they have no, that you all know how much we're told to read to our kids, right? If you don't have a parent who can speak your language, that's a hurdle. Because of the influx and the emphasis on American Sign Language up until recently, the local languages are disappearing, just as we see local languages disappearing around the world. There's a lot in deaf child education that's analogous to what happened in this country around the education of Native American children. You know, residential schools taken out of their context, though in fact, in kind of a flip, when we had more state-based residential schools, kids had more deaf community and deaf adults using the language they used. So they had more language exposure than they do now. So they don't have accessibility to sign storytelling as a learning activity, as a language activity, and there's very little available in the world of bilingual sign and text digital games for them to play with and learn with. So we came up with this effort called World Around You. The URL, I'm sorry to say, is deafworldaroundyou.edu. Is it edu? I can't remember. So sad. But we had to make it Deaf World Around You because there was a URI troll who wanted $32,000 for World Around You. We wouldn't normally have chosen to call it Deaf World Around You. So the goal for this platform and its content is to bring visual stories to children, share deaf-related stories, because you also, like any other underrepresented group, don't get stories about people like you. Give opportunities for deaf children and their parents to see signed and written languages. It provides workbook style games for reinforcement. Most of the content that we have on our platform is community sourced through the deaf communities in the country that they come from. We use web standards. The platform can be used online or offline. Secondarily, There's linguistic collection, data collection involved in it, can run on any web-capable device, and is open content and open source. So it's got a bunch of users, actually, obviously deaf and hard of hearing children being the first, but the hearing children in the family, the hearing children they play with, family members, teachers of the deaf, general teachers are like the first market. Secondary audience is people who are interested in sign language or who are interested in contributing to the platform. And what we have now running is essentially basically an alpha web app without a website wrapped around it. So when you go to that URL, you don't really see anything about the platform or what we're doing at the moment. It's just the thing. Here it is. And you see a library of different storybooks created mainly by the communities that they represent. You can click through the newest ones up at the top. You can pick different languages and you can sort. There's over 100 storybooks up. We've been doing this for about 2 years at this moment. When you select a storybook, you can pick from a group of text-based languages and signed languages to be displayed within the system. The system doesn't care what you put up. You can attach as many different collections of text and collections of video to a given storybook page that you want to. So this particular example has English Tagalog, which is Filipino, and Vietnamese, which is also referred to as Ho Chi Minh Sign Language for the textural language, and then Ho Chi Minh Sign Language. You also can do different video clips of both men and women signing the story, or different ethnic groups signing the story if you want to. Because the content is open source, you could theoretically decide that you wanted a French version of the storybook and work with your friends in France to put up FSL in French language to a Filipino creation story, right? There's all of this flexibility baked into the platform. When you start looking at the story, you get first the kind of still image for the art from the storybook, and then you get the signed version. There are glossary words hot linked into the text. So if you don't know what this word is, you can go ahead and click on the link and build that. The little glossary clip of the repeating word is built after you upload your story to the system. You can video edit and grab the individual clips for the individual words right in the system itself online, rather than having to upload them separately. And then those glossary clips drive not only the glossary function of the content, but they're also used in these workbook style games to go ahead and kind of detect reinforcement or success within the text of the language. So in this game, you would go ahead and drag and drop the right clip into the rectangle gap in the sentence, and you'll get a star or a sad face if it turns out you picked the right one or the wrong one. These are all template driven. So you just go through and build a game by pulling stuff out of your glossary. There's also a kind of concentration mix and match style game where you get true and false collections of video and text to match the game. The platform was built by working with the communities in the countries that we're currently serving. These pictures are from the first kind of user testing that we did in schools in the Philippines. The Full Life School on the left is a very small private school with no technology, no Wi-Fi, no nothing. We just ran the system locally there. And then on the right side, our partner in the Philippines is the University of St. Benilde, and they have deaf education programs for adults and children. They teach teachers of the deaf, and this Benilde Deaf School here is their model school that runs as a school, but is also a place to train their teachers. So we worked with groups like that. We then brought together essentially a kind of story-based hackathon, a story sprint, if you will, to build some of the Filipino language content for the platform. So we had people from the community come in for 10 hours a day for 2 days. The image in the middle is the poster that went around the deaf community in Manila to go ahead and recruit folks to come and join us to build storybooks. And we went ahead and did a little workshop on what makes a good storybook and what the structure is. And people created their own stories, either ones that were from folk tales from their culture or from their own experiences growing up as a child or their experience as a deaf adult. And they started building stories. And we had 25 stories, I think, at the end of the weekend. Some of them were very simple vocabulary, alphabet books, you know, one on vegetables and fruits where A is an apple, that kind of equivalent thing. We have since run camps like this in these countries. These countries were selected either because the National Technical Institute for the Deaf has relationships there, or our funders, the All Children Reading effort, which is an effort of private foundations and international governments to go ahead and drive efforts to build literacy. These were also countries that they had identified as being ones with significant literacy challenges they wanted to address. We have essentially a deaf community coordinator within each country that works with schools and with community members to continue to build more content for the platform. And this is all alpha or pre-alpha, depending on how you think about it, right? We've been through about what should have taken us 12 to 18 months over 3 years for obvious reasons, considering your facial accessories. It's taking a little bit longer to get this going than we wanted it to. The platform that this content is distributed on was built in an initial prototype with us and our students at NTID and RIT. We then partnered with a company called Second Avenue Learning, which is a Rochester-based educational game and software development house that works with folks around the world, big companies, small companies. It's out under BSD2 license at the moment. And we need to do some more development on the platform before it's ready for prime time. Right now, what we need to build into it is the ability for a teacher to assign individual books to either individual students or the whole class, to be able to build some assessment tech behind those storybook games. This wouldn't be formal literacy testing. This is more kind of how long did it take class X or student Y to be able to go through the assigned books? How many times did they have to go through the game to get stuff right? Just to get a kind of general testing of the water of how the students are doing. The real assessment would be built on top of that with the educators. We were asked to create an EPUB export. There is an effort funded by a number of UN member countries called the Global Digital Library, also funded by All Children Reading. And the Global Digital Library distributes everything as an EPUB. And so we've been working with them so that you can go ahead and export those stories to a single discrete unit. You wouldn't have the opportunity once it's in an EPUB form to pick multiple languages, either text or video, but you are able to pick which languages you want text and video in the EPUB before you export it out. Does that make sense? Okay. Also, what's next is a release 1.0 website to wrap around that tool so we can talk about what it's about, how people get involved. This is being built as part of the work that I do within our open source programs office, Open at RIT. We were funded by the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation to build essentially an inner source team that would work with faculty and researchers to better open their science data research projects, either working with people who had never opened a project to get it out in the open, or to revisit the communities and the channels in which an already open project was working in, to see if there were ways they couldn't improve their impact, their reach, and their technology. So the World Around You project and Chris's efforts are part of that fellowship program. We're hoping to be able to release the full website with the upgraded back end in 2022 in the fall. That would have a full set of documentation and training materials, which must be released in multiple textual and multiple signed languages. So that takes time. Going to improve the search, the library display, so it's easier to navigate. And we're going to improve the selection tool for the EPUB export. Right now, we have a fairly decent beginning of a small community of content contributors based, as you saw in that world map, of primarily those Southeast Asian countries. We want to expand that network over the next 12 to 24 months to be able to be working with more schools and more deaf communities in more countries. We also want to build a technical community, because the nature of the people we want to be able to take it over, and the smaller number of folks in deaf communities around the world with the technical skills needed to be able to stand something like this up. We want to be able to stand it up in a fairly solid fashion before we start bringing in technical communities, our technical contributors, into a community to eventually take that over from us as well. Once we have identified within the countries we're working with kind of a technical core team lead, we'll then open it out to the larger FOSS community to get support for that as well. And again, we're looking to do that around the end of next year. But the platform and the content are independent. And there's a lot of need out there to be able to provide people with multiple channels of multilingual information in text, in sign. And so we're hoping to be able eventually to extend the application of this platform beyond K-2 or K-6 picture books. We think that there's an opportunity to extend it out to older users with more complex content and a kind of larger learning reinforced back end to it. There's an opportunity to use it as a scholarly publishing platform for people who are in deafness related fields, or for deaf scientists and deaf researchers who would like another way to be able to publish their work and build their communities outside of the traditional printed peer-reviewed journals, be able to disseminate it in a different way. We also think there's room for a health and disaster emergency information site for deaf communities around the world, driven, not surprisingly, by the impact of COVID on the deaf community especially. And we think we'll be able to extend the existing platform to be able to do all of this, given the time and the resources to do it. Last week, we were inducted into this Xero Project Ashoka Impact Transfer Program. It's a big name. This is a platform, or this is a program in which you can only be nominated into. You can't self-nominate. There are hundreds of nominations. They work with 10 projects a year, and we were lucky enough to be selected. It is not unlike a kind of traditional startup accelerator, and give you a lot of the same kind of exposure to processes, pitch opportunities, that kind of thing. But it especially focuses on disability needs and disability tech that have an international reach. And it works with a fairly strong community of both disability programs around the world and with their own alumni to help kind of find ways to extend the reach of the work you're doing. And that short and sweet is where it's at. I wanted a lot of time for Q&A because there's a lot of stuff around deaf communities or sign language that people might not know that they might want to ask, in addition to the open source aspects of this effort. And so with that, anybody have any questions? Can I show you a demo? Absolutely. I saved it for last and did a lot of stills because internet. Didn't want to base the presentation on it and then not be able to access stuff. So as you see, these will be the most recent stories uploaded. And you can scroll through those. So the text is kind of small. So the caterpillar is happy in our garden, but mama is not happy. Find out why, for caterpillar lives in our garden. And if you roll over them, you see that there's an opportunity. Since these are news, they don't have any views or likes yet, but the platform will grab views and likes. That's how you would access the workbook games. And I'll probably go back to some of the older ones where I know there are games, because the games often come significantly after the book gets uploaded, just because the effort that goes into it. And you'll see that currently we display 9 books per page, and we're at 11 plus pages. So we've got a decent amount of content up there. And you'll see you'll be able to bias the search to written languages, given written language, a given sign language. And a sort just on more generic kind of metadata in terms of title or author. So let's go to FSL Mail. And we see some of the very early stories that were created. So we'll grab this one. All right, so this is Truck. Truck is signing this story in Ho Chi Minh Sign Language. Go ahead and lose the text if I want to just watch the sign language. You'll notice there's repetition here. This actually comes out of user testing, and we were kind of surprised by it. We assumed that people's default mode would be that they wanted the thing to auto advance page by page, and that was not the case. They wanted to be able to loop the same thing over and over again as a default, and then pick themselves when it went to the next thing. Okay, so the question was, for those of you watching on the internet, do we have karaoke style word by word, sign by sign, highlighting of text versus sign? The answer is no. It's a pretty large, not even just a technical burden, it's a really large kind of encoding burden. It's a lot more human effort to be able to do that. And we didn't want to put that burden on folks. So the only place you have that kind of stuff is when you see, right, when we go to the individual glossary, you get that. It's also important to know that a bunch of these smaller words, things like it to the, those exist in a visual context, and so they don't happen in sign languages unless it's an educator crafted sign language to teach the spoken language. A native sign language doesn't have things like the, it, to, because you see them, right? And when you do a sign language, you're setting up things happening for you in real time, in flashback, or in the future. They play out in front of you, so it's visually clear who you're talking about. We use those words to assign what we're talking about in the sentence, so that's why we don't do that. And actually, it's fairly common. One of the popular things with deaf people in any community is to play, what's your sign for that word? So in the testing, it's not uncommon to see people watching the stories in different sign languages in their own, just to see what it looks like. And why I didn't want to start with a demo. You know, as we know, stuff happens. That seems to be the style of the storyteller. It's not systemic. It's just how they chose to do it. Yeah, so in these story building workshops, when we go to the different countries and train the locals and how to go ahead and do that, we have them back. Since the block unit is kind of a picture book, which is a pretty standard across civilizations at this point, understood unit, breaking it down page by page is simple, and signing, the 1 or 2 sentences per page is simple. And then in terms of what words get picked for glossary, those are choices made by the educators or the community that's building the story. It's not something we do. So this whole video, right, this whole segment, this whole set of sentences was uploaded as one video clip. And then when people build these hotspots, when they're highlighting the glossary words that they want to work on, and those standards might be dictated by what are like the educational goals and targets for that age level in that country in that year, right? They might say, these are some of our target vocabulary words we want the kids to know. So there's an in-system online editor. So you'll get this clip up, and just like anything else, you use sliders, you'll isolate this sign. And then again, use that both in the games and in the glossary. Does that make sense? Now there should be games on this one. Also, yes, you can go full screen. I know we may hit some load issues for the games as well. Right, so since our target test market was the Philippines, this game uses the element of the jeepney. If you're not familiar with the history of the Philippines and the jeepneys, these kind of ride along, hop on, hop off buses were originally created out of all of the Jeeps that the US Army left after World War II. They took welding torches and just cut them up and extended them out. And they're all over the Philippines. Not all of them are built based from the original Jeeps, but some of them still are. So from World War II, yeah. They are. Yeah, well, there's no salt for snow, so that helps with the rust. So as you'll see here, you've got a rollover, so we've got to pick the sign for child. or for bird. All right. Anybody want to guess what that one is? We're picking either child or bird. That's definitely child. All right. Click there. You get a star. Well done. That's bird because that's the beak of the bird. Right. So. And so we'll go, if we're going to play the whole game, we'll go through 7 screens of vocabulary testing. I can do more if you want, or we can look at one of the other games or whatever else you want to do. I leave it to you. You want to play this game more? You want to try the other game more? What do you want? Yeah, sure. So what does the process look like for someone who wants to contribute a story or a game or whatever? You get an account, you sign up and you get an account. At the moment, because we're in early alpha, that's constrained. Longer term, it won't be. But for the moment, it's kind of a closed community. So we work out all the bugs. How do we what the testing user base? How do we select them? Thank you. At the moment, we're working in these little boot camps in the different companies. We'll go in, we'll set up a boot camp where we spend a week or a weekend with schools and members of the deaf community, different community organizations. And then we'll work with them and those local team leaders you saw pictures of before. And we'll build them out. So we're looking at a rollout again next year where we're starting to draw in more people. Yes, ma'am. So the question is, do we have people who are community managing the content uploads? That's another reason why at the moment we're working in these smaller closed groups to be able to have better control over that. There is a series of guidelines in those workshops, and we talk about Creative Commons licenses and, you know, do you check yes, people can make commercial versions or no, they can't. We kind of mandate that things have to be under one of those 2 open license. You know, is it a share and share alike or not? That's a decision made not only by us, but by the Global Digital Library. All of that content is also open licensed. And since a big chunk of the content that's going up on the platform right now is done in those kind of boot camps, we're able to communicate the nature of that licensing and the importance of licensing the content openly. So the question was, right. So the question is, have we reached out to established children's book publishers to license that content to put on that platform? We've done more of the opposite. We have had international children's book publishers come to us about republishing this stuff. We wouldn't, it's not a primary goal of what we're doing, primarily because a lot of this is about indigenous content, about content that shows the experience of deaf people, right? It's like, can we work with the Department of Education within a country to say, show us your curricular goals and let's work together to build stories that have a deaf experience context. You know, it's not a mandate that we must, but that's our preference. Another reason that we started to work in the Philippines is within the last couple of years, the Philippines mandated what they call a mother tongue law, which means that there are hundreds of islands in the Philippines. Most of us in America have no idea how big they are and how separated a lot of these communities are. So it was a really big thing for the Filipino government to say, we're going to start teaching kids in the languages that are situated in the places where they live. And it took a little bit more time to get that backfilled to signed languages. But now here was a country that was suddenly mandating, you guys have to get rid of all that American Sign Language stuff and build stuff that's locally situated. So it's a really great place to start. So there's a lot going on in this, right? There's so many layers of DEI and colonialization and all that other stuff that this is trying to work around and through. And there's still a huge battle in lots of countries about, should you even be using sign language with deaf kids? In the back, sir, please. So we have content in whatever the local communities can build, right? So we go to the local community, we provide a tool, they create the content. Because the platform's content agnostic. It'll take video clips and text. And I don't think you were here when we first started, so let me just show you. Right, so, but part of, a lot of this is literacy in the written languages of your country. So you'll be able to see here, sort of, that this particular book in and of itself has Filipino and Vietnamese, which is often referred to as Ho Chi Minh Sign Language. That's what that HTML is. And English, Tagalog, and Vietnamese text. If we go to the main level, so we're building out the language, the checkboxes for the languages, but it's really, it's about, you know, tagging and metadata. It's not about what the content really is. It's can we give somebody a checkbox that we don't have already and let them put that metadata on that object. Have we worked with deaf blind people as a test group? Not much. It's deaf blind people rely on braillers or on, yeah, or on, you know, someone who's doing tactile interpreting. And at the moment, that's a bridge too far. You got to get this right first. I have another, within that Open at RIT fellowship program, we're working with a professor who's the editor of a journal in science education for students with disabilities. And because of the challenges to produce appropriately accessible PDFs that are also matching what's on an HTML screen, they were in the position of publishing journal articles by blind authors who couldn't read their stuff published on the web because it wasn't compatible. We thought that was going to be an easy problem to fix. It has taken us months and months, and it's not fixed. It's an 80-20 or 90-10 problem now, and I don't know how we'd ever automate it. We're able to do it for the template that journal works with at the moment, but to get a match between the PDF and what you see on the website is unbelievably challenging. So, okay, so the question is, how many people are using it, and again, the other part, how does it reach more people at the moment through these small groups that we're working with while we're in this kind of early alpha, late alpha stage. So where it's working right now is in these countries. And the outreach for this is top down and bottom up. So we work with the governments and with the school system, but we also go to the deaf community organizations. We go to the deaf clubs, the deaf social groups, the the established deaf recreation groups, those kinds of things. And that's when we bring people in for these kind of boot camps, these content creation boot camps, we go to all those places. So the people you see here in these pictures are a range of folks, from school kids to the grad students in the deaf education program at St. Benedict College, to parents, to teenagers. So in fact, you'll see a common face throughout this. So this young man here in the red shirt got introduced to this package on either a Thursday or a Friday. We used him to demo how the package worked to the teachers, who were kind of the teachers and the community members who came to the boot camp. So he taught them how to use the package, and then he got himself a starring role in one of the stories as well. And he's 14 or 15 when we did this. So one of the things that we'll get support from through that Ashoka group is doing a much broader international deaf reach. But when we're ready, NTID and Gallaudet University in Washington, D.C. have international contacts all over the world. And there are conferences, international conferences as associations for the deaf, for example, that are annual or biannual, or at least were in the before times. And we'll be reaching out to those as well. All of them have seen this kind of content. Here's what we're doing, because we're really looking for community feedback as we build the tool. Other questions? More demo? What would we like? Yeah, it is. So when I said here, it was under a BSD license. I have to get back into present. So right now it's under the GitHub of the developer we're partnering with, Second Avenue Learning, but everything's there. Other questions? Yes, ma'am. That's the goal. Yeah. The question was, were we looking for technical contributors and when? And the answer is yes, probably Q4 next year. We hope to build, we'd rather, if we can set it up right, we'd rather have technical contributors from outside of the core deaf communities going directly to them instead of going to us and or our developer first and then to them. But we've got to build the capacity within those countries first. Any other questions? More demo? We've got what? We're at 146. I think I'm officially done. I'm happy to chat with anybody outside who has more questions or want more information. Thank you for your kind attention. My email address is, again, though it's listed here, is sj@mail.rit.edu. I'd be very happy to answer any questions. Chris would love to hear from you as well. His email address is in the old RIT unintelligible format of your 3 initials plus the 3 internal codes for your department. That's what that garbage of CAKNSP means. So his email address is CAKNSP@rit.edu. And thank you for your interest and your attention.